Hello, everyone. My paper is called Listening to Radiation, Interactive Media and Celebratory Control at Commutan Fukushima Center. This paper is a critical analysis of an institution called the Fukushima Communication Building of the Center for Environmental Creation, or Commutan for short, located in Fukushima, Japan. This paper then is also about the events that now haunt the word Fukushima, namely March 11th, 2011, and the earthquake, tsunami, and radiation triple disaster, now referred to as 3/11. The problems of 3/11 are very much ongoing. 2021 marked 10 years from the event. The anniversary saw a resurgence of discussion across the country, resurfacing an anxiety towards the events that never went away. More than this, however, the decennial was a painful and, it must be said, proud moment for many in eastern Fukushima and the tsunami-affected prefectures who continually live under the disaster's effects. I locate my talk not in the past then, but in this troubled present. In Fukushima, this trouble especially involves radiation, which is the focus of the institution and also this talk. Commutan Fukushima is a key player in this unfolding present. The center, pictured here, opened in July 2016. I should quickly note that this picture and all other pictures in my presentation are stills from an orientation video provided by the facility at their website, which I reference at the end of my talk. So, opening in 2016, the center is multifaceted. It houses facilities for the research and survey of radiation and for conferences about radiation mitigation and other problems. It houses a state-of-the-art public-facing center for the purpose of, in the facility's own words, education, training, and communicative exchange. It is this public-facing section that is the topic of my talk. More specifically, I will discuss two of its activities. The main thrust of my talk relates to the cultural studies insight that cultural meaning and circulation at institutions and in commodities are also the very substance of networks of power, even and perhaps especially when that power is apparently not signified in the circulated meaning. The center is primarily for children who are, in the center's own words, quote, responsible for the future, end quote. The center strives to, quote, nurture their ability to think and act on their own accord, end quote. To this end, the center provides interactive activities and exhibits that communicate various ideas about radioactivity, its presence in Fukushima, and the efforts to nonetheless bring to fruition an environmentally safe, productive, green future. Translating this from neoliberal state speak, the center invites authoritative social figures, parents, and teachers to observe children take up the center's many interactive activities to internalize certain lessons and predispositions towards radiation. Adults, while supervising, nonetheless themselves become implicated in those lessons and predispositions by internalizing a position in which those lessons must be enforced. The center functions through a mutually implicating system, given that both the adults and children who attend the facility are local Fukushima residents and, in a sense, social victims of the radiation exposure. I call them social victims because the sociological, cultural, symbolic violence of radiation is my concern. Note that such concern contradicts the prevailing radiation discourse, or at least supplements it, which is overwhelmingly focused on the biological. To a certain extent, this is only natural. Radiation bears a terrifying reality. It destroys DNA by ejecting atoms, like cutting bullets, neither seen, nor heard, nor felt. And yet, despite this quote-unquote reality, radiation necessarily occupies a surprisingly ideal, that is ideational, position. In other words, while scientifically we can describe the reality of radiation as DNA slicing atoms. How closely does this reality obtain in other key realities, like that of lived everyday experience? If radiation is neither seen nor heard nor felt, on what grounds does an everyday knowledge of radiation develop? Surely, alongside, for instance, the efforts to provide training in Geiger counter usage and microsievert readings to people in affected areas, there are other everyday knowledges of radiation that buzz not out of mechanical measurement instruments, but rather through other crucial yet non-disclosed social imaginaries. For all the discussion on how radiation is made sensible, there is little discussion on how radiation is made meaningful. I speak of a buzz resonant in the social imaginary because radiation, in a sense, is like sound. Thinking about sound can help us think about radiation and vice versa. They are both, quoting David Trichilo et al., ideal events, abstractions with real material effects that can only ever be thought retrospectively as autonomous entities, end quote. Therefore, what we call listening can shed light, as it were, on what it means to sense radiation. Sense here means both meaning and feeling. Radiation, like sound, to reference David Trichilo et al. Again, is a felt thought. In other words, the biological scientific domain in which the truth of radiation safety is determined is not the same and has surprising effects when encountering the various other social domains that radiation is sensed, and vice versa. Radioactivity, so frequently spoken of in terms of silence, can rather be referred to as nearly inaudible after Eugenie Brinkema. That is, rather than articulate it within a metaphysics of thinking its sensation as there or not there, radioactivity might be better captured in something far less capturable, namely in descriptions of tension and force. Commutan Fukushima participates in the shape or structure of this felt thought, of this meaning at large, of this humming of radioactivity in the mind. Commutan's aim is to project a scientific radioactive truth for children to embody through activity. But the effects of this aim, its translation into the socio-consumptive field, produces a structure of sense far removed from the highly simplistic communicative aim. Essentially, the diffuse social fear of radiation, very much alive, is redirected as a kind of fuel, driving the doubling back into conservative ethics of individualism and nationhood. The interactive games are texts through which we can attune to the quality and effects of the structuring. In these activities, sound and listening play, as they so often do, surreptitious yet significant roles in the production of this structure. I will now analyze two activities. The first is an interactive radiation blocking activity. The second is a quasi-interactive 360-degree cinematic dome, which acts as the climax of the facility. Please note that my experience of these activities is based on fieldwork in Fukushima in 2019. Now, the first activity. It is in the facility's learning or knowing lab. The activity occurs at what is called the radiation visualization wall. Its instruction reads, "Let's block gamma radiation," with an exclamation point. The child or children stand at a particular location or particular locations in which the movement of their arms are mapped onto a virtual silhouette. Mapped onto their hands are representations of blocks of either plastic or metal. The main activity is blocking radioactive gamma ray particles displayed as arrows. The objective of the activity is to learn about the effectiveness of metal over plastic at blocking radiation. Durability bars fill as particles are blocked. When blocked, a success sign, which you can see there in the gray circle, and a bing sound, which you can't hear, are triggered. When missed, including when an arrow encounters the virtual body, no sign or sound is made. Note that you can see in the presentation an arrow heading straight for the boy's virtual head, almost as if it's about to enter his ear. But what are the effects in sense that escape from this activity? The game is strange because it does not reflect any actual lived circumstance. There is no such means or rationale for the use of such blockers. Yet the two-dimensional game presents a perfect field in which all angles can potentially be covered. Both aspects are important. The perfect field represents the air of the world and slips into a state-like assurance of the possibility of being completely accounted for. The potential to block is here mapped onto the citizens' actions and endurance, how willing they are to perform in this perfect field. The perfect realm represents the world at large, which is provided with a science-backed knowledge of the differences between materials in the capacity to protect. The game stresses that one must simply accept this knowledge and one's personal role in mobilizing that knowledge. We can hear a kind of command here. We can hear it, in fact, in the ping when the gamma ray is blocked. The ping is a Pavlovian reinforcement of the social contract that one enters through the game. The point is not to pay more attention or to listen closely to the content of the ping. The crucial question to ask is, to what does the ping attune its listeners to? The sound is a quasi-interactive element. It only occurs when one exercises their volition to move the barriers, but one does not choose the quality of the sound. It does not occur during the normal circumstance in which the arrow encounters the body, normal because such particles are constantly passing through the body. The game normalizes the real world experience of the inability to sense radiation encountering you and aims to switch the sensation with the experience of radiation being already successfully mitigated by personal action and knowledge. The game sound attempts to replace the lived reality of radioactive encounter, the invisible and inaudible danger that one must wade through like an ooze of uncertainty, with a certainty and a celebration of a general success that has already happened, if only one is willing to participate in it. Now the second activity. This one, as I mentioned, acts as the facility's climax. It is a theater dome. You can see it, the outside here. Here's the inside. Groups of people stand suspended on a transparent bridge with a 360-degree dome that is covered, save the doors, entirely by a screen. Groups are shown video filmed by a special camera configuration, 2 fisheye lenses mounted on a drone. The footage is stitched together by software and fed to a media player that displays it to the screens. A microphone, and this will be important in a moment, was also attached to the unit. A musical soundtrack also has been added. The video's content very much resembles a travel advertisement, but one shown to people who are already living in Fukushima. It displays what Fukushima culture, nature, and community is to those already, ostensibly, part of them. The film narrates to viewers who they are and what Fukushima is. Mountain vistas, dancing groups, and Fukushima paraphernalia fill the 316 screen, or nearly. There is a key element related to what I've been calling the buzz of the social imaginary of radiation. In one scene of the video shown in the dome, for example, the camera mount captures a group of children approaching. They approach the suspended focal point on what I will call the north side of the dome. Their laughing is audible as they approach. The drone then lifts off the ground, traveling high above the children, and the camera catches them below, and then the scene ends. Before this scene, another scene was being showed on the south side of the dome. The footage follows this pattern so that viewers must find the right focal point each time a new scene begins. This is the dome's gimmick. Its effects are highly particular. The dome treats sound visually and vision orally. When the scene changes to the one just described, one is looking at an empty field, green grass extending to trees and the horizon. One hears children laughing and must assume this laughter is related to an image one is not seeing. One hears, unlike the screens, the speakers do not account for the position represented in the sounding bodies in the film. Since the speaker system remains surround sound, there's no difference between the loudness of the sound and the audience's directionality. In other words, sound does not act as it tends to in everyday experience. Audiences cannot use sound to orient themselves based on amplitude and expectations towards an object out of view, as is typical. They must use sound in the opposite way. It will tell you to look away based on an ideal image that the sound must be attached to. The image at the back of your mind, literally and virtually, is the sound you have to orient yourself with. Whereas in now common cinematic experience, the locational aspect of sound is already decided for you by camera angle and shot. Here, the sound is decided for you by its surround sound framework from the common cinematic form. The point pertinent to radiation here is that this configuration conditions and interacts with everyday experience of radiation. Its buzz, its nearly inaudible drone, its anxious mantra. For moments across the cinematic encounter, audiences are forced to stare into the radioactive abyss while being triggered to escape it with essentialist, nationalistic, and naturalistic messaging that was, it seems, already there. In the scene with the children, audiences begin the scene staring at the empty field. Radiation is highly associated with open and empty spaces. For a moment, before accepting the prompt, audiences stare into an empty field, listening to the disembodied, ghostly gaggle of children's laughter. Places hauntologically occupied by what can no longer remain. Audiences are forced to encounter and dissociate with their radioactive fear. The dome enacts in a quasi-interactive way the quasi-autonomous ideology that justifies living among radiation. Radiation is, like the sound in the film, in the process of being reorganized. It is gradually stripped of its sound-like quality, of being always there, but never exactly placeable, the buzz of radioactive fear, and restructured and collected into numbers, signs, messages, and information. The communication of essentialist qualities of Fukushima life, quote unquote, are trying to fill and replace the noise of radiation that now, regrettably, substantiates the signal of life for all living in eastern Fukushima. People living in the irradiated region should find ways to understand and make sensible their living situation. The problem here is that the center overdetermines the meaning of radiation with scientific forms of truth and essentialist forms of identity. They use interactivity as part of an ideology that moving equals understanding to delegitimize and the incongruous socio-political concerns about radiation. The revolutionary even question of radiation is all but cut at the root. The activities resolve rather than problematize, and the process of resolution is grounded in an understanding of a subject that does nothing but understand. The activities thus present simultaneously a highly liberal and highly state-deferring ideology. The state controls just enough so that you are free to be free, which is coded as consumptive social media-related activities. We, the state, will mobilize protection, and you, children and parents, must navigate the constraints. And you will enjoy this navigation. You will play the game of life among radiation. Strangely, the scientifically backed depiction of radiation is isolated radioactive particles undermines its own usefulness as an everyday framework of radiation during the activity. Similarly, the experience of having to constantly shift focus to and away from video and audio disrupts the cinematic experience, and yet the dome is enjoyed. Attention, then, may not be what is going on here. What are we attending to when we listen? Processes of attention are always also processes of feedback. Listening is never a neutral mechanism for detecting sounds. Listening is always already performing in and as subjectivity. Sound only becomes sound when it moves the complex bones of the inner ear thousands of times a second and resounds in the perceptual apparatus of subjectivity. The phrase listening closely, a translation of attend to, resonates with the visualism that slips quickly back into the metaphysics of presence as if the ear was a bunker for the eye, safe again from the specter of difference. The outer ear too often becomes the eye's blinkers, as if they are the means for keeping the workhorse of our perception, vision, from distracting itself. Thank you.